Right. 13-year-old dyslexic ADHD son. Okay, yeah. So I would recommend. I am a bit by. I'll issue a disclaimer right now. I do teach the Cambridge IGCSE course, but I'm a big fan of the syllabus, and I think it works well for children across the board. So students who struggle with SEN issues, who have dyslexia and so on, do very well with it. Actually, it tends to be one that they just get more easily, I think. So I would definitely take a look at the Cambridge syllabus, and I'll be talking you through it, so you'll have a starting point. Hopefully by the end of the session you'll have a better grasp of. Have you done any research into the options available, Dom? It's okay if you haven't. I mean, that's fine. There's no it's very relaxed and informal. I wanted to keep the session quite informal, so it's just kind of just talking things through together. That's fine. That's a good place to start, isn't it? So starting thinking about the different options, and yeah, do a little bit of investigation. I'll be talking about that in a bit more detail shortly. I'm just looking at the time. Maybe give people a couple more minutes, or should we just make a start? What do you think, guys? Hello, everybody. Those of you who've joined while I was busy talking about spelling. Hello, Emma and Lex and Phil. Lovely to see you, and Mia. And some names I recognize from the exact. How many? Just as a rough show of hands, how many of you attended the previous exam session that I did last year? Just to get an idea of where you're at in terms of how much you know about the process of sitting exams and how to go about it as a home educator. I know some of you, I recognize some of the names, so I know some of you did. Just trying to get an idea. Oh, you did! Lovely to see you again. That's fine, Mia. I hope you found it helpful, the recording. Yeah, quite a lot of you. Okay, so that means hopefully that gave you a kind of overview of how, the whole business is quite a kind of steep learning curve, I think, at the beginning. So kind of getting to grips with it. And a lot of it, I think, and that's why I think it's helpful to do these sessions, because I think a lot of it is just feeling reassured that you can do it. Even if there's material online to read, there's loads of stuff in the wiki and then the Facebook groups and so on, but actually talking to people, I think it gives you a lot of confidence. I hope it does anyway. It's reassuring. All right, so I think we're going to make a start because it's 5 and I've got a lot to run through. But as I said, I'm recording the session, so if you want to review what we've covered at the end of the session or at some later date, because there is quite a lot to digest. I ran through it with my older daughter earlier on today, just to kind of get her take on whether it was just too information overload, and she said it was okay, so got the thumbs up. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. First, a little bit of an overview. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about me. Some of you know me personally in real life, actually, and some of you are parents of students of mine I know at Key Stage 3, either in the webinars or the small groups that I do. And some of you, I think, are completely new to the group and I've never met before. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Hopefully those of you who know me won't get bored. And then I'm going to talk about the importance of IGCSE English language, so just contextualizing why it's an important qualification. I know all of you know it's an important one to have, but why it is, what exactly is a gateway qualification. I'll be talking about that in a few moments. And then I'm going to have an overview, give you sort of an overview of the different English language options for home educated students and what your options are, what the choices are. I'm going to touch on the edXL specifications, but I'm not going to go into those into too much detail because I'm a Cambridge specialist, so I'm going to be focusing on, in the last part of the session, mostly on the Cambridge specification and giving you an understanding of that, hopefully, so that you can take that away. And if you want to compare it with edXL, you can do so, and you've got a bit more information, you're a bit more informed about it, so you can kind of weigh up the pros and cons, because this is very much a personal thing, as with all subjects, with all syllabuses, and I've done a lot. I worked out the other day that I've supported my older two daughters with 16 different GCSEs over the years. So yeah, it's very much, and we've always compared specifications, so I'd urge you to do the same. Have a look at the different options available and think about which one would suit your your learner, your young person best. Is the internet connection okay? Because I'm wondering, I got a message saying it was unstable, so just let me know, because I actually have two networks, so I could switch network if it's a little bit dodgy, because I think maybe the rain might be causing some atmospheric disturbances, possibly. Excellent, excellent. Do let me know. And as I said earlier on, for anybody who's joined a few minutes into the session, please feel free to put comments in the chat and questions as and when they come to you, and I'll do my best to try and come to them. If I'm mid-flow, I'll check it periodically and hopefully address any questions that come up. So having looked at the various options available, I'm going to think about I'm going to kind of talk you through maybe and get your thoughts also about what you're doing currently to support your young person, what you could do, maybe just give you some ideas possibly of things that you could try. Running through some commonly asked questions and concerns, because I find that's why one of the reasons why I set this session up is because I get a lot of people asking me the same sorts of questions over the years. I've had a lot of people, and I spend a lot of time talking to people in my own time, giving them my advice. And so hold on a sec, let me just see. Is it okay? I'm just going to see if I can switch networks. I don't know what's going on with that. It's been fine all day today. Just let me know if it stabilizes. All right, Quinn. Okay, that's fine. All right, let's take a look then. A bit about, okay, hold on a sec. I'm going to see if I can switch network. Okay, I'm going to try and switch network. Sorry about that, guys. I've had no problems, and wouldn't you know it, there would be a problem today. Okay. All right, I've switched network. Do let me know if that's any better. Because I have got two now. I've got backup network because it's a bit temperamental sometimes, isn't it, technology? Okay. So I'll go back to resume share. So can everybody see the screen okay? Yep. Can everybody see the screen okay? Excellent, excellent. Hopefully it will stabilize a bit now. I don't know what's the gremlins in the network system. Okay, so supporting your young person, commonly asked questions and concerns. I'm going to touch a bit on what I offer home educators, the different courses and classes, because some of you have asked me about IGCSE. I know some of my current upper key stage 3 students have. So I'm going to run through the different courses and classes I offer, and then hopefully we'll have time for a Q&A session if we haven't addressed people's questions already during the course of the session, and any final thoughts, questions and comments, and some next steps as well. So right at the end, some maybe things to action, maybe things to, because I think sometimes when you're faced with a lot of information, you're kind of faced with kind of almost paralyzed, decisions are even more overwhelming. So some concrete things that you can take away and work on and think about. And oh, I'm glad reception's much better, Alison. Thank you. I'm glad that's better. Right. So some Zoom tips. I've set it to people so people can unmute themselves if they want to, but otherwise we don't get that. I've muted everybody so that we don't get any background noise. If you want to ask a question, you can pop it in the chat or you can raise your hand, and then we don't have people talking over each other. There'll be lots of, just feel free to put any questions in the chat and we'll just, go over them as and when. And there's also the Q&A, hopefully, that we'll have at the end. And as I mentioned at the top, I am recording the session. So if you're not comfortable with that, you can have your cameras off, that's fine. Any technical problems? I'm not a tech person myself. I'm not very techie, but I often find if you've got problems with sound, especially audio things, I find that if you just go out of the meeting and come back in, it tends to just correct itself. So If you do need to leave for any reason, you want to come back in, that's fine. I'll let you in. And yeah, that's it. If anybody wants to change their name, they can, but I don't think anybody needs to. If they don't want to, that's fine. So having got that out of the way, let's get cracking. So a bit about me, first of all. So I've been home educating for what seems like forever. It's like 17 years I worked at. So my eldest daughter is 20 and she's going back to university towards the end of September. So she's going into her second year of uni, reading psychology at LSE. And she was home educated right up to her A levels. So that was an interesting experience. And yeah, she wanted to stay home ed all the way. So she's off doing uni. And my middle daughter has just last week started at a selective, quite competitive sixth form college, having done all her GCSEs at home. She did 8. Both my older ones did 8. Not that you have to do 8, they just wanted to do 8. And so she's doing A levels at this college, and she's settling into that. My youngest daughter is, and I've got 3 girls, my youngest daughter is 11, and so I'm still on the home ed scene. I'm not yet yet retired from being a home ed parent. She's 11, so we'll be going, and she's already told me she wants to sit an exam next year, so I thought I'd get a break, but no such luck. We're going straight in with an environmental management next year, not next week. And a bit about my background. So I'm a qualified teacher. Not that you have to be a qualified teacher to support your child. Your commitment counts for the most. I do have a master's degree in English language and literature. I have a lot of years of teaching under my belt in one form or another, obviously supporting my own children who were home educated all the way through, apart from a very brief stint with my eldest daughter in reception, and we thought, right, no, we're out of here. So we took her out within a few weeks for various reasons I won't go into here. And my younger 2 never went to school, so they were home ed all the way through. And so I've had a lot of experience sort of teaching children at not just my own, learning with my children as well, I think, facilitating learning all the way through, really. But I specialise now in teaching at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a Cambridge specialist. So I really I'm a big fan of the syllabus. Both my older daughters did. Oh, hello, Jane. You have your camera on if you like. It'd be nice to see your face. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the syllabus, and I'll explain a little bit why I like it so much shortly. And that's just a bit about me. So if you want to ask me anything about myself, feel free, about my background or anything else, that's fine. So right, I thought it'd be important, well, kind of useful to look at the importance of studying for English. I know everybody knows you have to do it as a compulsory thing, but why? Why is that? Well, I think I'm a real believer in the fact that it's not just, it's a life skill you're equipping your young person with. So, I mean, we're all going to need to communicate with others, albeit via digital media and so on, in digital forms increasingly. But it's an important skill to have, to be able to express and articulate your views, your opinions, letters of complaint, whatever. So obviously that's a very important and practical life skill there. But in terms of onward progression, it's what we call a gateway qualification, which together with maths, most sixth forms and colleges will require young people to have a minimum or a pass in English language to progress on to an advanced course of study, or alternatively to sit English language alongside whatever they're studying, whether it's BTEC or A levels at college. And I want to make the point here that English literature, and I've had many people ask me this over the years, English literature is not, I repeat, it's not compulsory, it's not essential. Although we all went to school, I think I went to school, I don't know how many of you were home educated as young people, but English literature was something that everybody did at school. It wasn't an option. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not actually compulsory. So just to bear that in mind. In fact, the statistics are one of the most sort of commonly used centers for home educating families, Fairgoss in Hampshire. I think the statistic is something like 20% of students who sit language sit literature. So it's only a fifth of students. So, and my own, despite my background, my older 2, did not like studying English literature. We did a lot of reading, we did a lot of discussion. They were very able, but they didn't enjoy dissecting English literature. They didn't enjoy the process of breaking it down and thinking of it as a constructed thing. They wanted to believe in the world that the writer had created. And for them, analyzing it took away from that. Although for me personally, it enhanced my enjoyment of literature. But for them, it was something, and we did about 3/4 of the syllabus for GCSE before my eldest daughter told me she didn't want to let me down. But yeah, so just to highlight, it's not essential. It's not a requirement for college or university. I'd only recommend studying English literature if you enjoy the subject and if you're interested in studying it at A level. There's no point in forcing your child to study something they don't enjoy. So just to make that point there. Obviously, in terms of employment, they'll require evidence of ability in English, employers. And as I mentioned, it's an essential practical skill. And I feel that English is a very important subject to study in and of itself, because it helps us broaden our horizons, develop our knowledge and understanding and empathy, right? And that we need more empathy, I think, these days. And I think it's quite important, especially perhaps as home educators, to foster a critical mindset, to think about not taking things at face value when you read articles or listen to speeches, to question things and to understand the way in which language is very powerful. It's a powerful tool which can subtly be used to influence and shape our thoughts and opinions and behaviors. So I think that's something that's quite important that we should all be conscious of. And of course, I hope that English is enjoyable for most students who study it. Many of my students tell me they enjoy it. So even those who previously or ordinarily don't like studying English have told me that they enjoy my classes. So that's really satisfying for me. Right. Moving on, please do, as I said, let me know if you have any questions and I will address them as they come up. Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself as well and raise your hand to ask a question, that's fine too. Right. So a lot of the time people ask me, what's the best age to sit the IGCSE in English language? Now, for most kids, I think the best age is 15 or 16. My own two daughters, even that my older two, youngest one's yet to do it, the older two sat it when they were 15 going on 16, which I think was a good age, even though they had solid skills, they were good at English, and we'd done a lot over the years, reading and exploring different text types and genres and so on. I still feel it's beneficial to leave it till later because it just gives you more time to read. So English is quite a different subject to many others. It's not one where you just cram the information in and regurgitate it in an exam setting. You need time to build those skills. You need time to practice your writing skills, to find your voice, to build your knowledge and understanding, to have that time to develop your vocabulary, which you can't do overnight. And also that greater maturity that comes with that extra year or two, it really does benefit students because, for example, if you're writing a descriptive piece, drawing on a wider range of memories and experiences in your writing can, mean that you've got more life experience to draw on, right? So that's the point. You're also just kind of more knowledgeable about things, topical issues, you've read more, you just understand more. So I think that all helps to kind of enables young people to get the grade that they can, the best possible grade they can achieve, rather than rushing it, sitting it when they're not quite ready, and then not getting the best possible grade if they just waited a year or two. So that's just my take on that. I know, and that's not to say it's impossible or it's a terrible idea in any situation, any circumstances to sit it when you're, say, 14. I know people who've done that as well. But I think in most cases, it's not one of the ones that I would recommend starting with or doing younger. So that just a note on that, because it's a question that comes up often. So I've tried to think of the questions that people most commonly ask me and try to kind of think of what I can suggest to help parents with that. So this is another question that I get quite a lot. What can I do to help my child prepare from the primary years through to the pre-IGCSE years, and actually during the GCSE years as well? So I'm a big advocate of reading together. And I think that a lot of the time people think that once your child is an independent reader, you no longer need to read to them. And yeah, technically they don't need you to read to them, but I think it's beneficial to read to them because in so while you're doing that, you get a lot of conversational learning taking place and general knowledge, as well as just sort of thinking about themes and characters and ideas and sort of discussing plots and so on. And I think that's where, I mean, thinking back on my own experiences with I still read to my young people, even though the oldest is 20, the middle one is 16, and the youngest is 11. They still enjoy me reading to them, and just the books that we read are different. So we've read the Lord of the Rings books, and we've read lots of other books. So more challenging texts, obviously, as they've grown older, but there's benefit and value in it. So I'd recommend that. And if you think about it, we tend to think of it, it's not something that you do with grown-ups, but hey, Audible is really popular. People like listening to the spoken voice, right? So yeah, so that's something I'd like to encourage you to do. The other thing is reading widely. So people tend to narrowly kind of stick to a narrow, kind of narrow range of genres that they're fond of. And they don't tend to kind of stray from that too much. So what I would recommend is reading widely, extensively, different genres, kind of challenge yourself to kind of push those boundaries a bit and think about writing from different periods in time by different types of, different genres, different places, different authors. Discussion, as I mentioned earlier, it was a big part of our learning. It's always been a big part of our learning. So particularly things like discussing topical items in the news, articles, biographies, reading a lot of things. And so discussion and debate is a big part of developing the analytical skills and critical evaluation skills, learning how and analyzing how arguments are presented and counter arguments are presented and how they're demolished in some cases or challenged. And I think that, as I said earlier, is quite important to be able to interrogate texts and speeches and so on. And I think that's quite important, not just for English, but for other subjects too. A top tip is you don't have to fork out loads on books. There are loads of books available online. Project Gutenberg, Libby and BorrowBox, so they allow you to borrow books from your local library online. BBC Schools Radio has some good books online too. And even if your child doesn't, even if your young person doesn't like reading, and maybe you don't have the time or not the opportunity to read to them, Audible's great. You don't have to sign up for a paid service like Audible either. LibriVox and YouTube have a wealth of books. Some of them are better than others, I have to say. Some of them are a bit, the narration and the voices aren't quite that appealing, but there are some really good ones on there as well. I'd recommend reading poetry for pleasure. I'm a big fan of poetry, and for me, poetry is like distilled writing. It's a really rich source of, it's kind of learning how words work, imagery, and the way in which imagery can conjure up sort of like the essence of an idea. And children naturally, this is another thing I'm very passionate about, is that I think English needs to be fun first, right? And I think in schools a lot of the emphasis is on the grammar, the technical skills and so on, and I think that kills the joy. So enjoy words, enjoy the sounds of words. The technical skills, you can get to grips with those later, but some of my favorite poets for younger children: Benjamin Zephaniah, Michael Rosen, Edward Lear, Lewis Carroll, Spike Milligan, and Shel Silverstein is wonderful. I remember my middle daughter, who's 16 now, when she was 7, she memorized the Jabberwocky. She just loved the sounds of the words, right? So and children like that, right? Think about how popular Julia Donaldson, they can write back nursery rhymes and things. They like the sounds of words, but we kind of suppress that in a way by making it all about the technical things. Have fun with words, have fun with language, play word games and puzzles, Scrabble and word search. When I was a child, I used to love like word search books and acrostic books, word association games. become a word collector or an image collector, and build vocabulary by keeping a word bank. So that's a really good. I recommend that to all my IGCSE students when they first start with me, that they start to build up a word bank. So anytime you come across any interesting vocabulary or imagery, note it down. Borrow from other writers. All the best writers do it. Encourage that curiosity, and yeah, use a dictionary and a thesaurus. You'll expand your vocabulary. For reluctant writers, now I think that's another issue that some people have, that their children don't really enjoy the process of writing. And I think it can be quite intimidating sitting at a blank page and wondering where to start. And I think kids often put a lot of pressure on themselves to get it right, to not get it wrong. But it's a process, right? It's a process, so that's part of it. And I think there are strategies you can adopt that can help counter that. So, or give children a starting point. So using picture prompts, for example. So when my kids were younger, sometimes what I do is use a postcard of a place, and then look at the aspects of the scene and focus in on them and try to describe the different elements, and that gives them something to start with rather than just saying describe a place, right? So it gives them something concrete to work with and helps them sort of shape their ideas. Concentrate on ideas. The ideas come first, then the spelling, the punctuation, the grammar. Don't get bogged down in the detail around the technical aspects. Cambridge in particular, they place less emphasis on spelling, punctuation and grammar, especially on paper one. I think it's more important to use ambitious vocabulary and get the spelling wrong. Obviously you'd want to get it right ideally, but I would say if you're faced between using an ambitious word or one that's kind of a bit pedestrian or mundane, go for the ambitious one, even if you're not quite sure how to spell it, because that counts more, I think, than getting the spelling right. Another thing that I used to do with my middle daughter is sometimes you can't keep up when you're writing with all your thoughts, so record your piece, or record like nobody uses dictaphones anymore, but on your phone, say, record the audio of you narrating or writing, noting down your ideas, and then use that, because you can lose track of your ideas, I think, because you can't write them down as fast as they're coming. And also the technical aspect of writing, physically writing whilst processing the imagery and so on that you're thinking of, that can be challenging. So break it down, focus on the ideas, and then transcribing the ideas. So hopefully that is a strategy that might help. Okay, Kath has a question about spelling. So spelling is not how it works in the exam is the examiners don't start off with 100 marks and look to take things off if you get things wrong. It's positive marking. So they start off with 0 and they look to give you marks. So you don't lose marks for incorrect spelling. You just might not gain as much. But having said that, occasional errors are okay. I mean, they won't affect your grade, and they don't have a particular emphasis on spelling, punctuation, and grammar in paper one in particular. So there's 2 papers, so that's a plus with the Cambridge specification in particular. So yeah, that won't count against you as much. On paper 2, which is the writing paper, there is a criteria which relates to spelling, punctuation, and grammar. But again, occasional errors won't mean you drop a grade or anything. But yeah, I think this is a syllabus that works quite well for dyslexic students. So yeah, I've supported dyslexic students and they've done quite well with the syllabus, because there are ways in which they can gain marks in other areas. So yeah, it might be one to investigate for you, Kath. I hope that's helped answer your question. Okay, so I was talking about reluctant writers. Write from real life. Okay, so draw on. It's much easier to write about things, and I really stress this point with my IGCSE students in particular. Writing about things you actually know, people you actually know. So J.K. Rowling, I think she based one of her characters on her grandma. and she mixed her up with some other person that she knew. There was a physics professor or somebody that she had, and then there was a friend of hers. So she drew on real people. Maybe some of them were caricatures of the real people, or some certain aspects of their personalities were exaggerated, but there was a basis for it in real life. That's the point. So writing from real life helps you make your writing come alive more and more relevant, and it just makes the task less challenging, because you can actually close your eyes, visualize that place or that person or that object, and then you just need to recall and capture those aspects of it in words. So when my children were younger, we did a lot of writing which was kind of relevant to what we were doing. So if we'd gone to see a play, or if we'd read a book together, or if we'd watched a film, they might write a review. When we used to go on holiday, they used to research the place. So they were doing some research on, informative, using encyclopedias and so on, or books, non-fiction books, and they'd write a tourism leaflet, for example, or a kind of guide to the place that we were going to visit. I really like the idea of having a book and a film club, because reading the book and then watching the film is just fun, and it also allows students to compare and contrast how the themes are explored and so on. So yeah, so just some ideas that I thought might be helpful for those of you who maybe have reluctant writers, and how you can encourage your young people to enjoy the process, really, and not be afraid. I think a lot of it comes from just fear of failure, and I think that's really important to try and break down. Okay, and as I said earlier, it's a skills-based subject. I always stress this point. English is not like biology or geography or history. I did history A-level, tons of dates and so on. Of course, my kids didn't want to study history; they did geography, right? So just to be different, but the point is that English, like any skill, develops over time and with practice. So riding a bike, driving a car, whatever, it's not something you just get like that one day. It's not something you can just memorize, even if you know in principle how to write an effective article, or how to write a speech or a letter. It's something that you work on. So that's what I mean about the process. So I heard this quote, which was, so we often say practice makes perfect. So instead of that, I think it's important to think of practice as bringing improvement. And I think that can really, like, that sort of, when I heard that, I thought, wow, that's quite a different way of thinking about it, and it changes your perspective on learning. So thinking about how it's incremental, right? So each time you write something, you learn a bit more, you develop your skills a bit more, and then gradually over time, it just sort of falls into place. So wanted to emphasize that. So let's move on to think about, has anybody got any questions, by the way? Let me know in the comments if you have, please do. Right, so what options are available for home educated students? So the first thing to mention is that I'm going to minimize myself, I think, for a moment, or maybe I'll just move myself down here. Okay. Home educated students usually take the international GCSE, the IGCSE in English language, rather than the GCSE, because the speaking and listening assessments that are sometimes part of the GCSE syllabus aren't easy to facilitate as home educators. So IGCSE exams are far easier to find approved centres for. They're not impossible. I have to say, it's not impossible. You can, there are ways, people have done it, but I think for most people it's just an easier, more straightforward option to take the IGCSE. So of the IGCSEs available, there are three main options to choose from. So there's CAIE, formerly CIE, which is also known as Cambridge. And this board is particularly popular abroad, although there's a significant number of people who sit in this country as well. However, they can be in London. If you're in London, it's not really an issue so much finding a centre, but in some places it might be harder to find a centre for Cambridge than it is for EdXL. That's not to say you should let that put you off, because if you're prepared to travel, you can go anywhere and do it, and and if it's a syllabus for you, I'd encourage you to think about that. So the first language, IGCSE English language, there are two well, they're actually the same. There's the course code is 0500 and 0990. The only difference between them is the 0500, because people have asked me this is why I mentioned it. So they're identical. The papers are identical. The questions are identical. The only difference is the 0500 gives you letter grade, so A to G, and the 0990 gives you it uses the new 9 to 1 system. So that's just a preference thing, which you prefer. Also, for the 9 to 1, to get the 9, you may have to get slightly higher marks than you would for an A star. If you think about it, there's more grades in the 9 to 1 than there are 8 in the letter system. Okay. For the Edexcel, I'll touch on that, but I don't teach Edexcel, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with that. But one of the strengths of the Cambridge specification is, and I get this quite a lot from parents, a lot of students don't like studying literature. I guess in the same way that my older two didn't. Even if they like reading, they don't like dissecting a text and breaking it down and, ripping it to shreds. No, they don't like the process of deconstructing it. And that's fine. And some just don't enjoy it anyway. They don't, even if they don't enjoy reading literature anyway. So one of the strengths of the Cambridge is there is no literature component. In the Edexcel IGCSE Spec A, there is an anthology of poetry, which you study, and then you get, I think there's 15 poems or something in the collection, and you get asked questions on it in the exam. So for some people, that turns them right off. So that's something to bear in mind. And the Spec B, it's a similar kind of specification to the Cambridge, except that Spec B is 1 3-hour paper. It's examined by 1 3-hour paper, which is something that I think is a bit off-putting. I know for my two older ones who sat the exam, they much prefer doing 2-hour papers, which is what Cambridge offers. And it's a case of not putting all your eggs in one basket. So just say you have a really bad day and it's that one paper that all your grade is riding on, it's a bit much to put it all in. But then having said that, I know a lot of people do really well with it. There aren't that many specific resources for the Spec B as well, from what I understand. So that might be something that factors in your decision making as well. As I mentioned, so it's possible in theory to facilitate the speaking and listening element for the GCSE, but it's difficult. And just to mention also that some colleges, and maybe some of you aren't aware of this, that there are some colleges that offer home ed students aged 14 to 16 the opportunity to take their GCSEs in the college. City and Islington in London and Lewisham College in London, I know, especially Lewisham College has had a very long-running programme where they offer 14 plus home educated young people the opportunity to sit their GCSEs in the college. So just to mention that in case that's not been on you're not aware of that. Functional skills qualifications. Right, so I had a lady who specializes in supporting SEN students. She has an organization that supports inclusive learning, and for her own son, she didn't feel that the functional skills qualification was the best route, because in her opinion anyway, she felt it was the tasks on the paper were more challenging than the IGCSE. So she wanted him to go for the Cambridge because she felt that was the option that would give him the best possible chance of getting a good result and a good outcome. So that's something to investigate. I'm not an expert on functional skills, so I don't have a lot of knowledge of that, but that's just my understanding of it. That may be something you want to investigate further if that's something that you're considering. Yes, sure, Nadia, that's fine. I'll let you back in a moment. Okay, factors to consider. So why would you decide on one board other than over another? Well, one of the things I mentioned was the exam centre. So I suppose I shouldn't take that for granted. Not everybody, I mean, maybe not everybody's aware of it, but not all exam centres offer all boards. So Edexcel is more widely available, as I mentioned. But if you're prepared to travel, that shouldn't be a barrier. So that's something to mention, because people often say, find a centre and then see what they offer. So find a centre that's local to you and check what they offer and go with the board. Like if your local centre offers Edexcel, go with Edexcel. But that limits you a bit. And if you're prepared to travel, then you got free choice then. So just something to bear in mind, because often I see that advice given on forums and things. I find go with the centre. Go with the board that your local centre offers, and it might not always be the best choice for you. I would recommend that you study the syllabus carefully, so you've got an idea of what's required. I'm going to go over some of the aspects that are required and some of the different criteria and the different assessment aspects of assessment for the Cambridge specification in a few moments. But the best way to do it is to have a look, download some of the papers. Cambridge, there are plenty of file sharing websites online that you can there's a whole bank of past papers you can practice with. So download some papers, print them off, have a look at them, see what your young person makes of them, compare them with the alternative options, and see what suits your child best. And that's a recommendation for any subject, by the way. It's what I've always done. It's what most home educators do. So we're fortunate. We're in the fortunate position that we can choose what board and what specification we want to study, and we can choose the one that we think we will enjoy most and that will suit our young person best. Seek information and advice from others about their experiences. So the Home Ed Exams Facebook group and the Home Ed Exams Wikia is a wealth of information there and wisdom there gained over many years from people who've gone down this same path. And also, don't forget about consulting your local home ed groups, where you might find out about centres that are near you that people have used and recommend or not, as the case may be. And then bear in mind, obviously, that every child is different. And this goes for providers, it goes for syllabuses and specifications. What suits your child might not suit others and vice versa. So it is something, because people often say, what's the easiest one or what's the best one? And there is no best, there is no right or wrong. It's what's right for your child or what's best for your child. And that's a case of you have to kind of investigate that and do a little bit of research into the options and see what is your preference, your child's preference, and so on. So just a note on that, because there isn't a simple, it's not a simple, this is the best option or that's the best option. It's a case of working out what the right option is. Okay, let's take a look at the specifications then in a bit more detail. We've got Cambridge, as I mentioned, we've got a range of questions on the paper, both papers, which basically look to assess students' reading and writing skills. There's an emphasis on writing for real life context, I think, particularly sort of practical sort of scenarios, if you like, such as writing letters or journal entries. I guess in real life, for most people, unless they're employed as journalists, they won't be writing articles or possibly reports in a workplace environment. News reports, obviously, again, if you're not a journalist, unlikely, but it's about understanding how these text types work and the features and characteristics and conventions of them. So the Cambridge specification is assessed by way of two-hour papers, which I mentioned earlier. The Edexcel A, which is the one that has the anthology, that has two papers, one of 2 hours 15 minutes in length and one of 1 hour and a half. And the Edexcel Spec B, so the tasks are similar to the Cambridge, a variety of question types, but as I said, it's 1 3-hour exam, and there's not an abundance of resources available to support your young person and to help you support your young person. So there's less available, whereas there's quite a lot online for Cambridge if you want to do it yourself. There's quite a lot of good textbooks. So the orange course book is the one I recommend with all my students. So if you're looking ahead to that, that's the one I use, and it's very thorough and comprehensive. So there's quite a lot of material out there. That's the point for Cambridge. Why choose Cambridge? Why am I a fan of Cambridge? Well, I think that the criteria are transparent. I think it's quite, I think even if you have somebody who struggles, I'll share the name of the book maybe at the end. It's just, hold on a sec, give me a sec. It's this one. So I've got it here. So it's this one. It's called Cambridge IGCSE English. It's the student book, because there's a workbook which looks virtually identical. It's also got a bright orange cover, so don't get that one. And it's by Julia Birchall et al. So you can get it on Amazon if you want to get it on Amazon. It's about 20 something pounds. Right, so that's the one that's good. I recommend that one. And there's lots of others as well, but you know, if you were going to get one book, that's the one I'd recommend. You're welcome, Nadia. Okay. Cambridge, I think, the reason why I like it is because I think it helps students at all across the spectrum achieve the best possible grade that they can, right? So I think those students who enjoy English, who are good at English, who's strong in English, I think they you know, it's quite strict. I think they've already got a head start with that. I think, in terms of getting a good grade, if they've already got a solid foundation, it's really just a case of tailoring it to the requirements of the specification and the tasks that you're presented with, and the different kinds of writing that you might be asked to write. So it's just kind of tailoring it a bit and honing that. But those students who struggle with English, as I mentioned, for example, that they don't have as much of an emphasis on spelling, punctuation, and grammar, particularly in paper one now, and it's a lot more, I feel it's a lot more straightforward. You can figure out, and there are various tips and tricks, I think, that you can strategies you can employ to help you. You know, it's easier to work out what's required, and there's strategies that you can implement to help you nail the criteria. So I think it's just a lot more straightforward. I think students can, you know, especially students who kind of read things in a very literal way, I think it's much more straightforward in terms of what's required. It's not woolly or vague. It's quite straightforward, I think. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots and lots of past papers to practice from, and you can find the mark schemes and the examiners' reports online, which mean that there's a wealth of material to practice with, so that you can really assess yourself, your skills, and your progress in terms of whether you are hitting the criteria that the examiners are looking for. Something to mention about using past papers is that a few years ago, it used to be tiered, the Cambridge. So there was a foundation paper which students could get. It was capped at grade C, and there was a higher tier which was for the students who were aiming for anything C and above. But a few years ago, they merged it, and I think this has been a benefit for students, because there are a lot more straightforward comprehension questions that were on the foundation paper, which are now there's just one paper now that everybody sits. So I think that's been a benefit, and it helps students. I think it gives them an advantage. So there's yeah, and thinking about that doesn't mean to say that older papers are of no use, because a lot of the tasks are still the same, virtually identical. So they've changed some aspects of it, but the paper two especially is more or less the same, apart from the fact that you used to get one text to base your response on, and now they give you two. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment, so it make more sense, hopefully. There's no literature component apart from the writer's effects question. So the only thing you have that's literature related in the Cambridge specification is there's what they call the writer's effects question, where you have to you have to pick out and analyze some examples of figurative language. So identify an image or simile or metaphor, and then explain how the writer uses that to achieve an effect. How does the writer kind of create an effect on the reader through the use of that, breaking it down and working out and being able to explain how that works, sort of deconstructing it, if you like. But that's the sum total of the literature element on in this specification. So, and as I said, there's less emphasis on spelling, punctuation, and grammar, and more on being inventive and creative and ambitious with your word choices. So as I said, it's a better option, I think, for students with SEN, and it's easier to make sense of what's required. And I think you can develop an approach that works, so that you've got a strategy in place. And as I said, you've got two shorter papers versus one longer one for Spec B, which is similar in style but much longer. And so that's something that I think would put people off. So just to give you an overview of the assessment, how students are assessed. So you do paper one and either paper two or component three. Now, In practice, it means that home ed students do paper 1 and paper 2 because component 3 is a coursework option which isn't really open to us. So although that is something that you can do, it's not something that home educators do. We tend to just do paper 1 and paper 2. And as I said, the 0500 is for grades A to G. There's also an optional speaking and listening component, which you don't need to do. It's optional. So that doesn't, and it doesn't contribute to the grade anyway. So that would be for kids in school if they wanted to do it, but it wouldn't have a bearing on their grade at all. They're assessed on the papers or the coursework option if that's what they're doing in school. So the two papers themselves. So paper 1 is also known as the reading paper. Paper 2 is the writing paper. I'll go over what that means in a moment. Both papers are 2 hours long. The internet's unstable again. Has it settled down again now? I think I had a notification that was unstable. Please do let me know. Okay, great. Right, so for paper 1, it's 50%, so it's split between the two papers, 50% each, 80 marks in total. For the paper 1, the emphasis is more on reading. That doesn't mean that there aren't marks available for writing. Reading means showing and demonstrating that you've understood what you've been given. So you're presented with the passage. In fact, there's 3 passages. And you have to show that there's a series of different tasks designed to test your comprehension, your ability to analyze both explicit meaning, so straightforward facts and information, for example, and your ability to read between the lines and pick up on implicit meanings, things that are suggested or hinted at rather than stated openly or in an obvious manner. So and paraphrasing is a big part of that, which is where vocabulary comes in. So if you put that groundwork in the pre-IGCSE years and you've got that extensive vocabulary, you'll have plenty of words in your arsenal. So you can find a word to substitute for another or a phrase to substitute for another, because paraphrasing is important because it shows that you've understood what you've read. Because if you just copied, it doesn't show that you've understood what you've read. How you demonstrate comprehension is you use alternative words to express the same idea, and then that demonstrates clearly to the examiner that yes, this person knows what this means, right? So that's where the emphasis on vocabulary, building that extensive vocabulary in the younger years, stands you in good stead when it comes to the GCSE period. Okay. So as I said, it's a reading paper, so primarily testing your ability to understand what you've read and analyze what you've read and evaluate and assess what you've read. However, there are also marks available for writing, which is the quality of writing. So it's not just spelling, punctuation, and grammar. It's your ability to structure your writing, to sequence your writing, to use paragraphs, because you'll be surprised how many students don't use paragraphs. It's all one long piece, and examiners can't award you marks for structuring and sequencing if it's all one big long mass of words. Things like your vocabulary and your use of language. So are you able to use interesting, engaging vocabulary, and are you able to use figurative language, metaphors, similes, personification, and so on? Not just in descriptive and narrative context, but if you're writing an article, for example, or a letter. Paper 2 is the writing paper, and the emphasis here is shifted more towards the writing. It's weighted more towards the writing. So the emphasis is very much on writing. So your skill as a writer, it's your ability, your opportunity rather, to showcase your skills as a writer. And there are also some marks for reading available too. So it's a bit misleading when it's known as the writing paper and the reading paper, because there are reading and writing elements in both papers. It's just weighted differently, weighted more towards reading on paper 1 and less towards writing, and vice versa on paper 2. I hope that all makes sense. If there's anything that I'm saying that doesn't make sense, or you want me to clarify or go over something again, please do let me know, because I've tried to make this kind of like a beginner's guide, but I appreciate there's quite a lot to take on board. And yeah, so You don't need to worry about the coursework portfolio because that's not relevant to us. But on paper 2, there are 2 longer writing tasks, which each count for 25% of your grade. There is a directed writing response in which you're given 2 passages, usually presenting opposing views or alternative viewpoints or perspectives on an issue. And then you are given a task to essentially synthesize information from both passages and create something new, a speech, a letter, or an article, typically for paper 2, so the more challenging text types. And the other task on paper 2 is a composition. So you get a choice of descriptive or narrative composition. There are 4 titles to choose from. You can choose any one of the 4. So that's quite nice. Students have quite a lot of choice. I'm glad it makes sense, Anna. Excellent. That's what a teacher likes to hear. Okay, right. A brief guide to the assessment objectives. So I always stress this for all subjects, right? So students can't be assessed on anything that isn't in the syllabus, okay? It might sound obvious. So if you go back to the syllabus and you understand, Samina's got a question about the coursework. There's an option to do coursework, but it's not a practical option for home educators. It's really only something that schools would use. So for home educators, really, you just do paper 1 and paper 2. That's the only realistic option. There isn't really it's very difficult to get coursework assessed. So I don't know of anyone who's done coursework for Cambridge. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. So in practice, what you're doing, although that's an option on the syllabus, is not one that's really open to home educators. So it would be 100% pure exam, 2 papers, paper 1, paper 2. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if it does. Great, excellent. Right, so I always stress that it's important to read the syllabus because they cannot assess you on anything that isn't on the syllabus. For English, it's a bit more vague in some ways, but for a lot of other subjects, so you can take this into your revision and you're not learning for other subjects, everything that they could possibly ask you a question on will be stated in the syllabus. So if you know the syllabus inside out and you know what's required inside out, you hopefully have insured yourself against, things going horribly wrong. I don't think it would if you've understood, if you've really got to the nuts and bolts of the syllabus, right? So the objectives, what they call the assessment objectives, the AOs, remember I said there was reading and writing. So the reading skills, these are what the examiner is looking for in a candidate's response. Can they show that they understand explicit meanings? Can they show that they can pick out straightforward, obvious information? Those questions carry the lowest marks because they're the most straightforward. Okay, so if it says, if you've got a sentence saying, oh, the train was delayed, there's nothing to read into there, right? It's just a straightforward, obvious meaning. That's what we mean by an explicit meaning. Implicit meanings, however, are things, words, phrases, images that suggest something. So for example, I'll give you 2 examples for an explicit meaning versus an implicit meaning. So if I say, the woman walked up the hill, right? Straightforward, obvious, that's an explicit meaning. How did the woman get up the hill? She walked up there, right? An implicit meaning version of that would be a sentence using an implicit meaning that's linked to that would be the woman trudged up the hill, right? So trudged is very different to sprinted, which is very different to strolled, which is very different to sauntered or whatever. So you get the idea. That word, trudged, suggests something more, right? The way in which she's described suggests the way in which her movement is described suggests something about her, suggests something about her state of mind, suggests something about her emotional state. Maybe she's carrying physically, she's carrying heavy things, or maybe she's burdened emotionally. So there are things that we can read into. There are things that we can kind of analyze, layers of meaning. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's the distinction between explicit and implicit meanings. Hopefully that makes sense. Also, another reading assessment objective is the ability, examiners are looking for the ability to analyze, evaluate, and develop facts, opinions, ideas, and so on. So using the text that they give you, so all the questions that you're asked on both papers are based on a passage which the students respond to in some way. So it's not things plucked out of. Apart from the composition one, which is you're given some sort of it might be write about a time when you enjoyed a meal with others or something, or write about a time, describe leaving a place for the last time or something. That's actually something very similar to an actual past paper question. So obviously with those, you've got a lot more freedom and it's not based on a passage, but all the other tasks are based on a passage. So they're looking for your ability to pick out the facts and ideas and opinions that are presented, whatever they may be, in the passages they've given you. That's what they mean by appropriate support from the text where relevant. And then they want you to break that down. That's what analyze means. And evaluate means weigh up. So if you're given alternative viewpoints on something, can you weigh them up against each other? Can you assess the merits, the strengths, the weaknesses, the pros, the cons of the different perspectives? That's what they're looking for there. Can you show that you understand how writers achieve effects to influence readers? And can you use and select information for specific purposes? So you are typically given a passage in one genre or text type. It's called a genre transformation task. So if you're given a speech, I'm going to think of an example here. So say you're given a journal entry describing an Antarctic explorer's journey across the North, Antarctic wastes and so on, right? So it's a journal entry. Then you are given a task where you have to imagine that that person has been asked to give a speech to a group of young people. They quite like school scenarios, I'm afraid. So just to warn you now, I think that's quite common to a lot of these syllabuses. So imagine now that you've been asked to give a speech to young people, talking about the benefits of exploring and challenging yourself, physically and mentally and so on, psychologically. So you're taking the ideas that were in the journal, which is a very particular kind of writing, but you're turning it into a speech, which is a different kind of writing, and it's for a different audience. So that's typically the kind of thing, I mean, that is what you need to do. What you're given in the paper one especially is you're given a passage and you have to turn it into something else. Take the ideas in it, use your own words, and turn it into a different kind of writing for a different audience with a different purpose. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Because yes, Nadia, the recording will be available. I'll share it in the Facebook group once we've finished today, for the benefit of others as well, and so that you can review everything as well. Because as I said, I appreciate there's a lot to take in. That's fine, Nadia. Okay. So so that's the reading objectives. The writing objectives are, as you'd imagine, focusing a lot on your ability to articulate, experience, and express what is thought, felt, and imagined. So being able to express yourself in lots of different ways effectively. As I mentioned, organizing and structuring ideas and thinking. This is where planning, and I know a lot of students don't like to plan, but it really makes a difference for this particular assessment criterion. Using a range of vocabulary and sentence structure, so mixing up your sentence types, so using simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, using different openers, so your sentence doesn't start with the, every sentence doesn't start with the. Using different, there's lots of, as I said, there are strategies. I hope that you can see what I mean about there are strategies that you can kind of work into your writing once you take them on board, which will help you nail these criteria. Using a register appropriate to context. Now that just means writing in a manner with a suitable level of formality for the context that you've been asked to write. So, if you're writing a letter to a friend, if you're asked to write a letter to a friend or a family member, the tone, the vocabulary, the style, the structure even possibly might be quite different to, not so much the structure, but definitely style, tone, and vocabulary will be very different to if you're writing a letter to a prospective employer or a hotel manager, for example, right? So understanding who you've been asked to write for and using language which is appropriate for that scenario, that situation. And obviously there we have the make accurate use of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. But as I said, there is a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more leeway with that. And I always encourage students to be ambitious with their vocabulary rather than err on the side of caution and stick with what's safe or what's known. Push the boundaries a little bit. And so that's your reading and writing assessment objectives. So hopefully you've got a good handle on that. And obviously you can come back to it and pore over that. And by the way, this is all taken from the syllabus. So I'm just kind of talking you through what's specified in the syllabus. And you can find the syllabus online on the Cambridge board website. So yeah, and this is just an overview of what we talked about. So reading and writing comprise, the weighting is 50-50. The assessment objectives as a percentage of each component, really, that's quite straightforward there. So let's move on to thinking about subject content. So we talked about reading, and let's break that down a little bit more. So you have to show that you understand written texts and the words and phrases within them. And you have to be able to summarize and use the material. So that's what I was talking about, adapting, the genre transformation aspect. So summarizing and taking out those key ideas and focusing on what's relevant and using it in a particular way according to the task that you've been set. I kind of mentioned developing, analyzing, and evaluating. So that's the weighing up of the ideas and so on that are presented, and how writers achieve their effects and influence readers. Yeah, so we've covered quite a lot of that now. So recognizing and responding to linguistic devices. So that's basically understanding how writers use imagery and figurative language. So, and I always tell my students, it's not a spotting exercise. It's not let me spot the simile or spot the metaphor, or I can identify some personification there and job done. No, you have to break it down and actually explain how that works. In fact, it's completely possible to get full marks for the questions where you're analyzing a linguistic device, the use of linguistic devices, without even making reference to the fact that it's a metaphor or a simile. It's more important that you understand how the writer has used that technique and how that achieves a certain effect. Okay, and that's the business of how you explain that is what you, and students sometimes struggle with that. They're okay with the identification bit a lot of the time, but getting from that to explaining how that works can be challenging sometimes. So I do quite a lot of work with students on that. So engaging with a wide range of genres and text types. So there are lots of different text types that are covered in the specification. So there are 7 different ones. There's a letter, journal entry, article, news report, formal report, speech. Have I missed one? I'll come on to it in a minute. I think I've missed one, but we'll look at that in a moment. So I've talked about this already. So this is the content for writing. So being, these are the ones, right? So letter, report, article, journal, speech, interview. That was the one I missed out. So interview. So being able to write any one of these, because you won't be asked to write all of them in one series, but you should be prepared for any one of those to come up. So you on the paper 1, there's a longer writing task, the extended response task, in which you could be asked to write any one of these. On paper 2, there is a directed writing response, which typically tends to be not so much the interview summary and so on, but definitely the article, speech, or sometimes letters, but often articles actually, because it's a little bit more challenging and sort of incorporating and weighing up, and there's skills of evaluation and analysis which they're looking for, and it's the evaluation particularly that is essential to access the top marks for this specification. You need to be able to demonstrate you can evaluate ideas, not just reproduce it in your writing what you've read, but weigh them up against each other and bring in your thoughts on that. So hopefully that all makes sense. So I'm going to break down what's on the paper. So I said that paper 1 is a reading paper, also known as a reading paper. It's a written paper, it's 2 hours long, it's 80 marks. There are 3 compulsory questions. You're given 3 texts, which might be on a similar topic, and you get an insert with the texts in it, with the passages, and you get a booklet in which to write your responses, and you just write on the dotted lines. There's sections available for you to write your responses for each of the questions. Text A and text B, so the first 2 texts are about 700 to 750 words. Text C is shorter, and there's reading time built in. So generally, I don't know how many of you have sat exams and other subjects, but generally the advice with exams is, in terms of marks, is you want to spend about a minute per mark. So if a question's 1 mark, you'll probably spend 1 minute on it. If it's 5 marks, you'll want to spend 5 minutes or so on it. But with English, because there's these texts to read, you need to factor in reading time as well. So there's reading time built into the time available, the allowance there. So, and as I said, you've got a paper insert. So you've got a separate little booklet with the inserts, the actual passages which you're basing your responses on. Right, so the first question, I said there are 3 compulsory ones. So the first one is a comprehension and a summary task. So it's actually 2 in 1 really. So there's a series of comprehension questions. So they're what I call the low-hanging fruit. You know, a lot of them are short answer questions, explicit meanings, some implicit meaning there. But it's thinking about, these are the assessment objectives that are being assessed here for this particular task. Your ability to show that you understand explicit meanings, your ability to read between the lines and pick up on those more subtle meanings that are hinted at, and your ability to pick out and use information for specific purposes, particularly for the summary writing task. So you're given a passage, and the task is just to simply write a précis of it, a shortened version, a condensed version in your own words, and you'll have a specific focus for that as well. So that's question 1, comprises of comprehension and the summary task. Mia says, to answer the question, do they write on separate paper or in an outlined box? I'm asking since my son is doing maths past papers and the box is sometimes quite small. I don't have a paper here to hand, otherwise I could have shown you. But basically, it's a question, and then there's a large like section of the page which has dotted lines, and you just write on it. And it's normally a fair, you know, it's a good sized amount. It's not small. I think when thinking back on it, when my older girls sat this exam and they did tons and tons and literally tons of past papers, they never had a problem with space. They never ran out of space, and they did tend to go over the guideline number of words. So I'll talk about word counts in a moment. Because there aren't any hard word limits for any of the tasks. There is guidance provided in the question about the number of words you're aiming to write, but the summary writing task is the only one that's strict on, it's a word limit. So my point was that they generally tended to write more, and even then they didn't end up having, and there are separate pages at the end, by the way, if you wanted to put extra information in. Is the internet okay? Do let me know. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't think your son needs to worry about English in that case. He should be fine with English. I think maybe he'll have plenty of space for his answers. And there's also, as I said, there's pages at the end which you can use, additional pages if you need them. Okay, so that's fine. So that's covering question 1, comprehension and summary. The summary task, as I said, I've already kind of touched on that. So it's a selective summary. So the key here is to write the summary using your own words. Again, the skills of paraphrasing come in here. Examiners take a very dim view of what they call lifting, which is just taking whole chunks of the sentence and then dumping it in your answer, or whole sentences. They want you to paraphrase, and that's where you've got a hard word limit of 120 words. And what they're looking for here is, are you showing that you know how explicit meanings work? Can you pick out the explicit meanings that you've been asked to focus on, the implicit meanings, and can you write a summary? So, for example, things like when people write a summary, they quite often, when they're first starting to practice summary writing tasks, they tend to write introductions and conclusions. And for this question, you just do away with that. So it's things like that they need to kind of be aware of, because that's using up words and things which they don't have spare. And so that's the purpose. The specific purpose there is to communicate the facts as concisely as possible, right? We're not interested in using examples, illustrative examples, or metaphorical or highly descriptive language. We just need to communicate the facts in a summary, that's all. So it's understanding that purpose there. And also to be able to organize and structure ideas. So this is where combining points from the passage you've been given to write longer, complex sentences actually is if you can do that well, that makes the summary writing task much easier and much less daunting, because it's basically combining information where appropriate into longer, complex sentences to give you kind of dense sentences, really capturing several ideas in one sentence, of information-packed sentence there. So that's the summary writing task. And again, you've got these other assessment objectives. vocabulary, sentence structures, so that's what I mean by complex sentences, and making accurate use of spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So you can get marks for that, although I think they've done away with that now on the paper one. They don't have any specific reference to spelling, punctuation, and grammar for paper one anymore, although it's still there for paper two. So question 2, remember I said there were 3 compulsory questions. So question 2 is short answer responses. So a series of short answer questions and language tasks. A series of questions which are made up of like lots of parts, really, part answer questions. And that carries 25 marks in total. So there's explicit meanings. You see it comes up again and again. So there's criteria that we looked at. These are what they're looking at for each of the different tasks. They're looking to assess different assessment objectives. So it's knowing what they're assessing you against, which is crucial. And looking at mark schemes and examiner reports is a vital it's really helpful in terms of getting to grips with what examiners are looking for. So that is something I'd highly recommend. And it comprised a big part of our revision strategy for every subject we did, and we did them all ourselves. So yeah, I've got a good understanding of lots of these different subjects. So highly recommending poring over the examiners' reports as well, because you understand a lot about what students find tricky and the pitfalls you want to avoid and so on by reading those things. Okay, I think that about covers the short answer questions. Now, the extended response question, which is the question that carries the most marks on paper one. And even then, you're only writing 250 to 350 words, which is only like a side of A4. So it's not, I mean, and as I said, that's not a word limit. You can go over that, you can write 2 sides, but obviously you don't want to be waffling. You want a good quality. It's not just quantity, it's quality of the response. And you want to ensure you don't take time away from other questions. So there's aspects of strategy, exam strategy you need to think about here as well, and timings and so on. And so as I mentioned earlier, so this is the question where you could be asked to write a letter or report, a journal entry, a speech, an interview, or an article. And this is what they're looking at for these questions. Again, explicit meanings, you'll see the same things coming up, right? Those criteria coming up. Are you able to analyze, evaluate, and so on? Are you able to express those ideas and structure your writing and use extensive and engaging and interesting vocabulary and a range of different sentence types and so on? Are you employing a register? Is the level of formality appropriate? You know, are you talking to a bank manager but using, you know, colloquialisms? That wouldn't be appropriate. Are you speaking to a friend but speaking in a very kind of posh way, which wouldn't ring true, but it doesn't sound authentic and convincing, and they're big on that. They want students to produce answers, even though it's a completely fictitious scenario. They want students to produce answers which are convincing, which sound like they could be real, right? That sound authentic. So moving on to paper 2. So we've got two longer questions, only 2 questions, and I've already touched on some of this already. So we've got the first task, which is the directed writing response. You are given that's one of the changes that they made when they merged the 2 tiers. So previously you used to get one longer passage, which it was more complex, I think, and you had to break down the ideas in it. Now you typically get 2 passages, and one would be in favor of, I'm trying to think of a past paper question where, oh, there was one on esports. So esports, so whether esports should be included in the school curriculum. I told you they like schooly scenarios. So whether esports should be included in the school curriculum, so playing electronic games and things online. And so there were 2 passages. One was kind of broadly in favor of that, or kind of related to that, thinking about the advantages or the positive aspects of esports in general. And the other was thinking about the negative impact of that. And then there were some points that you could, if you thought about it, you could take some of the ideas a bit further and think about that. For example, esports are, you know, watched at home, you know, and people aren't as active. So therefore, is it encouraging a sedentary lifestyle? Is that something as a school we want to encourage? You know, that kind of thing. So you can see there's aspects that can be explored and developed further, and that's what they're looking for. That's great, Dom. I'm glad you found it helpful. Okay, hopefully you're able to catch the recording and see the rest of what we talk about. I'm glad you could join us today. All right. So, thinking about all those different sentence types and so on. So, yeah, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought there. So, you're given two passages, and the task really is to combine information and synthesize points from both texts into one piece of writing where you maybe evaluate and weigh up the strengths. I call it a game of ping pong. So, you're going back and forth with the pros and the cons. Um, that's all right, Kath. That's all right. Um, and so we've got various reading assessment objectives there. So understanding explicit meanings, implicit meanings, and so on. So you'll see the same criteria, just the emphasis on the different tasks and the different criteria varies a little bit, but it's broadly the same kinds of skills coming up again and again. And the composition, narrative, or descriptive task. So you get a choice of narrative or descriptive, and there are 4 different questions to choose from, and you're given a title, and usually they're quite broad, so there's lots of different possible directions a student could take it in, and the more inventive and original, the better. So if it's like describe a meal with friends or something, don't just think of the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know, sitting around the Sunday roast or something with the family. Maybe think of something, unusual, different, like eating on a mountaintop, or eating, I don't know, on a beach or something, a picnic. And maybe take a different, even if it's a kind of scenario which is more kind of conventional, maybe take a different slant to it, maybe describe it in a particular way. For example, I wrote a piece with my daughter on a question like that, where we described all the people. I think it was a picnic, it was a family picnic, and we described all the people as though they were animals, eating in different ways with different mannerisms and so on, like nibbling or devouring or guzzling or whatever, use all these kind of ideas. So kind of a different, and it's slightly humorous as well as a result. So examiners get bored rigid, I think, with the same kind of themes coming up again and again. So if your young person's piece can stand out as interesting and original and refreshing, I think that can only be an advantage for them. So you need to write about 350 to 450 words, which again is not a huge amount they want you to write here. So it's about a side and a half. I think my older two, when they did this task, they typically wrote about 2 sides. You don't get penalized if you go over the word limit. But again, it's a writing objective. Notice it's all writing objectives here. There's no reading objectives. So that's what I mean by it's a writing paper. There's more of an emphasis on the written skills and the quality of expression and the vocabulary and the structuring and so on, and the imagery and the figurative language that's being used for effect. Okay, so I've given you a quick whiz through of the syllabus and the papers and the assessment tasks. And so I thought it might be good to, at this point, have a bit of an overview, just summing up what we've covered. So as I said, there's 2 papers, paper 1 and paper 2, each of which are 2 hours long. Both are worth 50% of the overall grade. Each is worth 50% of the overall grade. The reading paper involves comprehension, summary, short answer responses, language and writer's effects, and the extended response. And there's more of an emphasis on reading than there is writing, although there are writing marks available too. Paper 2 is directed writing, the task where I said you get 2 passages presenting alternative perspectives often on an issue, and your job is to integrate those and kind of weigh up the strengths and merits and so on, and weaknesses and so on of each of those perspectives to come to some conclusions, evaluate those ideas, and then you get a choice of narrative and description. I think this is really nice because I always encourage my students to do the descriptive, which I think is much more straightforward task for most students than the narrative, where you've got to think about plot and character and so on. And it's much more involved. You only have 1 hour to do it in. So yeah, although some students do narrative, and yeah, perfectly fine. My older two did descriptive, and it was good. They both got very good grades, so I recommend that. Right, a bit now on what I offer students. So some of you are my current students already, but I offer Key Stage 3 webinars and small groups. So basically, I started running these because students would come to me at 14, say, typically, and they hadn't put that, they hadn't had the foundation. So it's like anything, you've got to build, you need to build on strong foundations, right? So if you haven't done the groundwork in the pre-IGCSE years, it can be a much steeper learning curve. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's a lot more challenging to get to grips with what's required. So I think learning is incremental with English, and skills are developed over time. So I started offering these to help students develop that foundation, really. And so I offer sort of webinar style as well as small group one-to-one. And I kind of take a holistic approach to learning, and that's something I'm quite fond of. So I try to pick interesting themes and weave in science and history and geography and so on, environmental issues and all sorts of things. So the idea was also to make them affordable, because I offer one-to-one and small group as well, and obviously that not everybody can stretch to that. So it's kind of giving students high quality learning opportunities, really, but affordable ones as well. And I've had some phenomenal feedback from people about that. So if you're interested in that at all, do let me know. And the IGCSE course that I'm running, which I've just put together and I've already got a few students starting, is basically, well, I realized that there was a gap in the market. So there are sort of self-paced video courses for a lot of other subjects, for sciences and maths in particular, but there isn't anything like that for English. And I thought it would be a good idea, and I think it's something that a lot of people might benefit from, because it gives you flexibility, so you can work at your own pace. So it's a set of interactive video tutorials which are aligned to the textbook, and I provide lots of supplementary information and resources as well. And so you can work at your own pace. So a strong student, they could do it over 6 months. As a student who needs more time, can access it for up to 2 years. So you can work at your own pace. And I was just thinking about the things that I valued as a home educating parent, what I would think is a good thing in a course. So I tried to roll all of that in. So there's marked feedback on 10 assignments and 2 marked papers at the end, and lots of opportunities to build and practice skills. And a big thing that I'm very, very I think is a really important thing for students is modeling. So giving them good, I started writing responses for my oldest daughter, because when she was doing it, like many years ago, this specification, there wasn't a lot of exemplar material online that I thought was very well written. And it's really, I think, the best way of helping students understand what makes a good response is to show them a good response, rather than just explaining, this is what you should do to make a good response. You should include figurative language. What does that mean? How does that work in this context? So I started writing model responses. And so I've written model responses for everything. That book I was mentioning, this textbook, there are no answers for this book, which is hugely annoying. There is a very expensive teacher's resource, which is of limited use, because if you're asked to write an article, it says typically something like students' answers will vary, which is of very little value really to the student. So I started writing responses to these questions, and that was the thinking behind it, so that students could self-assess and then do the tasks when they were ready. So just to kind of give you an idea of what I do, and sort of there's a range of different options I have in terms of self-study, or whether you want to do the complete course with marking and feedback. I also do an intensive exam preparation course, which is just kind of a potted version of my whole longer up to 2-year course, but just over 1 term. So it's quite, as I say, it's intensive. So that's for students in the run up to exams. And yeah, so just to give you a little bit of information, because I've had people ask me, do you offer IGCSE? A lot of my upper key stage 3 students have asked me about that. So I thought it'd be helpful to include that. And that's something I've just put together. So yeah, do contact me if you'd like more information. So it's over to you now, guys. Has anybody got any questions? And hopefully I'll answer. So it's a Q&A. I don't know if you have any thoughts, questions, queries, worries. Oh, your audio is really
Hi,
bad.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
I don't know if it's me or I don't even know, but the audio is really bad. Really useful session. I think I must have texted you this. I was meant to be on this session because I've got all these, various questions. So as you know, we're in the small group sessions on a Tuesday. Highly recommend that to absolutely everybody.
Thank
And
you.
then of course, because I'm greedy, as you know, my daughter also listens into the webinars as well, which she finds really useful. So right
Mm.
now, I know it's age, not stage. So she's
Yeah.
14 in
Yes.
old school year 10.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? Because I think, should we start the IGCSE
IGCSE.
prep or
Yeah, I think it really depends what kind of timescale you want to work over. So this is kind of really a preference thing. I think I mentioned to you before that my kids always did all their IGCSEs and GCSEs over one academic year. For
mm,
them, that worked. And I think they would have got bored if I'd carried it over 2 years.
yeah,
But then for some students that works because I mean it's a personal preference thing really because for some students that works because they need that first year to kind of build that foundation, kind of to get to grips with it. And going at a
yeah,
slower pace means that they can build gradually rather than trying to cramp. Because really, one academic year, when I say one academic year, if you start in September, which we typically did, um, I would aim to finish the syllabus by Easter. So really, you're talking six
okay,
months. It's quite intense. So
yeah,
the period from Easter to the exams, and just a heads up, the exams for this particular syllabus, the Cambridge, are always in the early May. So it's not even June. So it's early May. So really, from Easter to the exams is past
yeah,
paper practice, and really just kind of honing those skills. And yeah, so it's really a case of what you think your child would benefit from most, whether the slow and steady approach would be better or the kind of intensive approach. And I think if you do it over 2 years, you have the advantage that you actually have more than 2 academic years because you've got that summer break in the middle as well, haven't you? So you can build in learning time
yes,
and all that. It
absolutely.
doesn't have to be even formal learning, but just reading and discussing and talking. Like with my oldest daughter, I was forever sending her emails of Guardian articles I'd read, and then I'd bookmark it by
Mm,
sending it to her, and then we'd read through it, and then we'd look at the article and we'd think, what is this person trying to say? How are they getting their point across? Is it a persuasive piece? How are they trying to persuade? What techniques, devices, what methods are they using to try and convince the reader of their viewpoint?
mm-hmm.
If it was an article, how's the
So,
writer made it engaging, like using personal anecdotes or using drawing on personal experiences or using humor or figurative language in an interesting way. So really, I think, and I emphasize, I should have made this point earlier on, but for me, and this is the best advice I can give anybody, is reading and writing are two sides of the same coin. People often think English is more about
yeah,
writing, but reading is actually crucial, is critical because that's how you learn what good writing is. You sort of just absorb it
mm-hmm,
almost
mm-hmm,
like osmosis, kind of you just absorb it and it seeps into your pores and you just kind of know instinctively
yeah,
almost what makes good writing by reading the whole range of all those different text types that I mentioned. So read those journals and the biographies and read articles, read Time
mm-hmm,
magazine, read Nat Geo, read these, and you don't
mm-hmm,
have to get expensive subscriptions. The BBC has a great section, BBC Future,
mm-hmm,
BBC Technology, I think, and there's a whole, and it's really good for general knowledge as well. So it'll tie in
mm-hmm,
probably with other subjects as well. So read widely,
yeah,
and discuss and examine, break it down, because a lot of the time we let these kind of aspects of language wash over us.
yeah,
We're not conscious of it, and so kind of becoming conscious of it, becoming aware of how language is used is I think where the greatest progress comes, really.
yeah.
So
No, that makes
discussing these
sense.
things.
No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. No, thank you. So I think it's just, I appreciate that insight. So I think, as you said, it's preference, and it's just, I mean, she's loved these, the small group sessions. So the key thing now is
Yeah.
just see how do we expand from there, but also
Yes.
fitting in the things like the reading, all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
then when we're ready, well, you'll probably hear
Yeah.
from me because I just need to make a plan.
we can
But
discuss
thank
it
you anyway. That's
further. We
very
can discuss
useful.
it further. But the upper key stage 3 sessions, they use a lot of questions. So the students didn't know this, Jane, but actually a lot of the questions are past paper questions or modified past paper
Yes.
questions. And I talk them through it. So without realizing it, they've been building their knowledge of the different text types and the criteria and so on. I've adapted and modified some of the tasks, but I think the key point is breaking it down, talking through the texts and
Hmm.
looking at them together is what helps with is what I was saying about learning through reading,
Yeah.
kind of absorbing what makes good writing and all those different text types. um
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Mia has a question. Which website would you recommend to get past papers from? There are tons. There are tons. If you Google Cambridge IGCSE IGCSE English language past papers, you'll get Papa Cambridge, you'll get what are the other ones? There's Papa Cambridge, I can't think of the other ones. IGCSE Centre. There's loads of them, and I don't think it's strictly legal, but I mean there's so many that I don't think they can, I'm not sure of the legal status of it, but they're out there, and there are tons, really, honestly. So you won't have a problem. I can link a couple, actually. I'll link a couple, Mia, if that's helpful, in the chat, on the post in the Facebook group, so that people can access them directly from there. There's also some really useful YouTube videos as well. Um, there's quite a lot. Yeah, no worries, Mia. I can do that certainly. Has anybody got any other questions, thoughts, comments, or ideas, or just feedback, actually? Hopefully you found it useful. I was kind of conscious of the fact that I didn't want it to be kind of, me throwing loads of information at you and you'd kind of just shell shocked. But hopefully, oh, I'm glad, Anna. I'm really glad that's been helpful to you. I just really wanted to encourage and support parents as well, because yeah, so with the course that I've developed, one of the things I've got is a kind of complete independent learner option, where in that last part of the course that I do, the part, the exam preparation course, is that part of the whole, the longer course. The last part is the exam preparation course that I do as an intensive, that 1 term intensive potted version. That it kind of teaches you how to mark papers yourself, how to get to grips with it. So I talk through the examiners, uh, the mark schemes and the examiners' reports, and in that way, you get to understand it from the inside, if you see what I mean. Um, I'm glad, Mia. Yeah, I think that can be a bit daunting when you're reading a lot online, especially on the wiki and stuff. There's some valuable, really valuable insights in there, but I think it really does help to talk to somebody, right? Oh, thank you so much, Emmanuel. I'm glad you found it useful. Yeah, there is a lot to think about. You're on track to do Spec B, but you're not sure. Well, when were you planning to sit the exam? I'm sure you've got time. It's only just September. Even if you were planning to sit it next year, I mean, that's one of the beauties of home ed as well. You can change direction. I'm not saying that you should definitely do Cambridge, although I admitted I am a bit biased towards it. If Spec B works for you, then that's fine, but you do have the option of changing. Don't be a slave to it. That's Oh, hello, Lex and Phil. Lovely to see you. I'm so glad you found it helpful. And yeah, that's one thing I would like to finish on, actually, that don't feel that any path is set in stone. You can change. Even if you've committed and you feel you've committed to the resources and so on, you can change things, right? You can carve your own path. You can decide that something's not working or not quite right, and make a change, right? Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And there's one last thing I wanted to end on just some next steps, some positive, because as I said, I was aware that I might just be, a lot of information coming at you. So I thought I might just finish on just some practical things that you could do, just to remind you of things that you could, implement maybe in your homes with your young people. So reading, discussing, and debating all kinds of writing, as I was saying earlier on to Jane. Um, Read those
Yeah.
specifications. Go online.
No, I know.
Sorry.
Little snippets, isn't there?
Hello? Do you
Oh,
mean to be unmuted?
yeah.
Okay. So thinking about, go online, look up the past papers, compare the specifications, and think about what suits you best. Think about your particular learner's way of working and what their preferences are. Go back and review the information, the guidance in the home ed exams wiki. Go on the Facebook group and do a search and see what other people, because there have been many people who've debated and discussed which spec to do before you. So you can benefit from other people's experiences. Seek advice from those local home ed groups and the Facebook, if you've got local Facebook groups, so you can find out about centres that are near you that people recommend. But don't feel that you have to be, it doesn't have to be a deal breaker. If the centre isn't near you, if there's a centre that does Cambridge but it's a while, fair distance away, maybe you can work that, if that's a possibility. That's something you could consider traveling the distance. Take time to enjoy English and tie it into things that you're doing to make tasks meaningful and relevant. So just not writing for its own sake, but writing, keeping a journal, for example. It's a lovely thing to look back on, even if it's just a holiday journal, or keeping a record of special events and things like that. So hopefully you guys have found the session useful. I hope you have, and you've learned a bit and feel a bit more informed, and a bit more confident, maybe reassured that it's doable. You can do it. Okay. And yeah, if there aren't any other questions, I think we'll wrap up.
Thanks
Anybody
so
got?
much, Aram. That was really brilliant.
Oh,
Thank you a
you're
lot.
welcome.
Really appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
See you
You're welcome.
soon.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, Aram. Bye.
Bye. All right then. Take care and best of luck with all your journeys. And please do let me know how you get on, because I'd be keen to know how things are going. And it's a lovely little community, I think, on the Facebook group. Actually, it's quite supportive. You're welcome, Anna. I'll say bye-bye for now. Take care, everyone. Bye.